It started at 5:12 a.m., long before the school bell, long before the teachers pulled into the parking lot, and long before anyone noticed the halls had already been cleaned. Every morning, 63-year-old Melvin Carter laced up his worn-out sneakers, zipped up his thrifted jacket, and stepped out into the dark. No car, no bike, just his two aching feet and the same 6-mile walk to Franklin High School he'd made. For the last 7 years, he never complained, not once. Even when it rained so hard, his socks squished in his shoes. Even when frost clung to his beard in winter. Even when his knees locked up halfway through his route, Melvin just walked quietly, faithfully, and always on time. To most of the staff and students, he was just Mr. Carter, the janitor. The guy who mopped floors, fixed leaky faucets, and always gave a respectful nod when he passed you in the hall. Few people knew his story. Even fewer bothered to ask, until the day something changed. It was a Friday morning. A teacher, Ms. Whitney, happened to drive past Melvin while heading in early. She saw him limping slightly, his shoulders hunched, his hands red from the cold. She slowed down, then pulled over. "Mr. Carter," she called out. He smiled. "Morning, Miss Whitney. Beautiful day, huh? Do you need a ride?" He hesitated, then nodded with quiet gratitude. As he climbed into the passenger seat, she noticed how thin his jacket was, how worn his soles looked. She asked casually, "How long have you been walking to work?" Melvin chuckled softly. "Since the day I got the job. Never had a car that ran longer than a month. Walking works just fine." But that answer didn't sit right with her. Later that day, she shared the story in the teacher's lounge. By lunch, the whole school was talking. And by 3 p.m., a group of staff members brought the matter straight to the principal, who immediately scheduled a private discussion with the school board. The next Monday, Melvin was asked to attend the board meeting. He almost didn't go. "I ain't in trouble, am I, he asked. "Of course not," the principal said. "We just want to talk." So Melvin showed up, still in his work uniform, still with that quiet, humble posture. He sat at the end of the long oak table, surrounded by polished shoes and tailored suits, and he had no idea what was coming. Melvin sat quietly at the end of the table, his hands folded tightly in his lap. The school board president, a tall man with a gray blazer and a polished voice, leaned forward. "Mr. Carter, first let me say thank you for everything." Melvin nodded humbly. "Just doing my job, sir." "No," the woman next to him said gently. "You've done far more than that." There was a pause. "Do you know how many days you've missed since you started here?" another board member asked. Melvin looked up surprised. "Missed?" He shook his head. "Not one. Can't afford to miss a day. Got grandkids that like to eat." A soft laugh ran through the room, but it quickly gave way to a respectful silence. Everyone knew he wasn't joking. The board president cleared his throat. "Melvin, when Ms. Whitney told us about your daily walk, we were shocked. You walk 6 miles to work, 6 miles home, rain, cold, heat. You've been doing that for years." Melvin just nodded again. No complaints, no excuses, no attention. "You've quietly given this school more than most people realize, and we think it's time someone gave back." Melvin tilted his head. "I don't understand." The board president smiled. He stood, walked to the side door and opened it. A few people entered the room. Staff, teachers, even some students, each carrying something: a folder, a clipboard, a set of car keys, and a small envelope. Melvin looked around, clearly confused. The principal stepped forward. "Mr. Carter, we started a GoFundMe. At first it was just the teachers, then students chipped in, then parents. And when the community found out, it took off." She opened the envelope and handed it to him. Melvin's eyes widened as he pulled out the check. $10,000, he whispered, stunned. "Actually," the board president corrected, "it's over 20 now. That was yesterday's balance." Melvin stared at the number, speechless. One of the students, a quiet senior named Devin, stepped forward and held out a keychain. "We also bought you a car," he said. "It's parked outside, low mileage. We got insurance too. And a prepaid gas card." Melvin blinked, once, twice. Then he covered his face with both hands as his shoulders shook. He wasn't a man who cried easily, not in public, not ever. But in that moment, surrounded by faces he never thought noticed him, Melvin Carter broke down. One teacher stepped forward and placed a gentle hand on his back. "We're not giving you charity," she said softly. "We're honoring your service." The applause in the room lasted longer than Melvin could handle. He wasn't used to the spotlight. He wasn't used to cameras or people clapping when he hadn't fixed a leak or cleaned a mess. But this was different. This was a kind of love he hadn't expected and honestly never believed he deserved. That night, Melvin didn't walk home. He drove. A silver Honda Accord, clean, smooth, and quiet, waited for him in the parking lot, complete with a red bow across the hood. Devin, the student who had handed him the keys, walked with him to the car. "You okay, Mr. Carter?" he asked. Melvin turned to him slowly. "I've spent the last 20 years looking after other people," he said, his voice shaking. "Never thought someone would look after me." Devin didn't know what to say, so he just smiled. "You earned it, sir." The next morning, Melvin pulled into the school parking lot. Early as always, but this time, he stepped out of a vehicle instead of walking from the road with dust on his shoes. Students noticed. One boy whispered to another, "That's his car." A group of seniors clapped when he entered the hallway. And that's when something else started happening, something Melvin never could have predicted. Students began stopping to talk with him. Really talk. "Mr. Carter, how long have you worked here? Did you grow up in this town? What keeps you going every day?" At first he was shy about answering, but soon Melvin realized they weren't asking to be polite. They were asking because they cared. They wanted to know about the man who quietly cared for them all this time. That week, Ms. Whitney invited Melvin to speak to her social studies class. "I don't know nothing about textbooks," he joked. "You know about life," she said. "That's more important." Melvin stood at the front of the classroom the next morning, unsure of where to begin. The desks were full. Even a few teachers stopped by to listen. He talked about growing up in the South during segregation, about working 2 jobs to raise his children after his wife passed away, about losing his first home during the recession, about how he walked to work because he'd rather his grandkids eat than spend money on gas. The class was silent. When he finished, one student, a tall boy who'd barely passed last semester, raised his hand and asked softly, "How do you stay so kind?" Melvin blinked. "No one ever got better from being mean," he said. Hurt people, but healed people we help." A few students wiped their eyes. From that day on, Melvin's presence at Franklin High changed. He was no longer just the janitor. He was a mentor, a friend, a symbol of quiet strength. As word of Melvin's story spread beyond the school, something extraordinary began to unfold. Local newspapers featured his photo on the front page, with headlines like, "Unsung, Hero Walks, Miles to Work, Town Walks Miles for Him." News stations picked up the story. One morning, a national morning show ran a segment called Everyday Heroes, and Melvin's face appeared on televisions across the country. He didn't ask for any of it. He didn't even own a TV. But the next day, strangers began sending letters to the school, addressed simply to Melvin the janitor, with the big heart. Inside were handwritten notes, gift cards, thank you messages from people he'd never met. One letter came from a woman in New York who wrote, "You remind me of my father. He also worked quietly, and I never got to thank him. Thank you for being someone my children can look up to." The school's mailroom had to set up a separate bin just for Melvin. And then something even bigger happened. The superintendent of the district invited Melvin to speak at the annual staff development conference, a gathering of hundreds of teachers, administrators, and school employees from all over the state. At first he said, "No, I'm not a speaker," he told the principal. "I mop floors, not stages." But she smiled. "You've already inspired this whole town, Mr. Carter. Just speak from the same place you always do, your heart." So Melvin agreed. On the day of the conference, he stood behind the podium, dressed in the only suit he owned, which one of the teachers had taken to get pressed for him. The room was filled with professionals, some in ties, some in heels, all of them expecting a speaker. They got something more. He began with a deep breath and a simple truth. "I'm not a teacher in the way most of you are. I never stood at a chalkboard. I never handed out grades. But I've walked these halls. I've seen your kids when they think no one's looking. I've seen the tears after a bad test. I've seen the joy when someone finally makes a friend." He paused. "You don't need a degree to care. You don't need a title to make a difference. Sometimes all it takes is showing up, even when your feet hurt." The room was completely silent. "And if there's one thing I've learned," he continued, "it's this. Our job, all of us, is to leave people better than we found them, every day." When he finished, the standing ovation lasted over a minute. Melvin didn't cry this time. But when he stepped off that stage, something had changed. He wasn't just the janitor from Franklin High. He had become a voice of purpose, a quiet leader who reminded people why they chose education in the first place. Months passed, but Melvin's impact didn't fade. It grew. The school board, inspired by the overwhelming support, decided to establish an annual award in his honor, the Melvin Carter Everyday Hero Award. It would go to school employees, not just teachers who went above and beyond, with humility, compassion, and quiet strength. Custodians, cafeteria workers, aides, bus drivers, the backbone of every school. Melvin was invited to present the first award himself. That year, the recipient was Maria, the cafeteria worker, who had once stayed late every Friday to pack weekend meals for food-insecure students. Melvin handed her the plaque with a proud smile and said, "Keep doing what you do. It matters more than you know." But that wasn't the only change. The school implemented a mentorship program, one that paired students with trusted staff members for weekly check-ins. Unsurprisingly, Melvin had the most sign-ups. He didn't give homework advice. He didn't lecture. He just listened. One of his mentees, a freshman named Tay, who had been struggling with bullying later, said in an interview, "Mr. Carter was the first adult who didn't try to fix me. He just sat with me until I remembered I was worth something." And the ripple effects spread beyond the school walls. A city council member proposed free bus passes for all school employees earning under a certain salary, citing Melvin's story as proof that transportation was a silent barrier for many. Local businesses stepped up, donating winter gear and shoes for custodial staff across the district. What started as one man's morning walk became a movement of dignity. As for Melvin, he still showed up early, still mopped the floors, still nodded politely to every teacher, student, and stranger in the hall. But now when people passed him, they said things like, "Good morning, Mr. Carter. Thank you for all you do. You're a legend around here." And one chilly spring morning, as he stood at his usual post outside the cafeteria, a kindergartner with a messy backpack walked up, tugged on his sleeve, and said, "Are you the guy with the car now?" Melvin chuckled. "That's me." The boy grinned. "You're famous." Melvin crouched down to meet his eyes. "Nah, son. I'm just a man who kept showing up." He stood, stretched his back, and turned as the school bell rang. And like every other day, he stepped into the hallway not just as a janitor, but as the soul of Franklin High.